No, I'm not the speaker. You're all safe.
It was interesting because soils, which of course we don't have great soils here. It's 417 inches. Oh, 8%. I think it rains. So, anyway, yeah, I'll take a couple of
Laurel can make friends with somebody new that you don't know. Nancy can make friends with somebody who doesn't know.
I got my essay article.
we said,
You said you did.
we said,
I'm trying to tell people to come out to see where it's started. They tell me about the program. I'm going to do a few introductions. The county commissioner is going to do a talk. Maybe we'll check to do something around here. Typically, they name him after some
I left my notes up here along with my book.
Okay.
So, you know, there we go. I'm ready.
So have a seat momentarily.
This is the best booklet because it teaches people how to
Decided I better study the source. I had a neighbor and he just like, yeah.
Yeah, you got it.
Doesn't mean anything.
Even I didn't see about which side. It's always on its right.
Yeah, but which right?
Yeah, which right? Is it the audience's right or is it the speaker? The answer is.
That's exactly what Well, it's confusing. I'm trying to figure that out.
Okay, pretty sure it's the audience is right. And you've been traveling very long.
I was tempted to call, but I didn't want to interrupt your guys' plans, whatever you guys were going to do. And then I even thought about calling Rich. But I know he's always got stuff going on. And I didn't know that he'd have a day just to burn, you know.
Yeah, he said something he was going to do overlays on his fish.
Oh, wow.
I think that was his plan today until this phone call.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of wondered about the last night.
Was he still looking for the tanks?
Yeah, he said he had to go to the tanks.
So I've got one tank. If we needed something just to make it work.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Hey, look at that.
Oops. Hats are hard to hang on to, I guess. I'm Chuck Hillestead. I'm president of the Yamhill County Historical Society. Welcome. Glad you're here. It's a birthday party. Since this is a historical society, I want to make a little footnote. This is not technically the birthday. That's July 5, but nonetheless close enough. From the perspective of 175 years, what's a few days? And we're here because I think it's very important to acknowledge the history that we have here. Obviously, it's in our name, the Yamhill County Historical Society. But more than that, it is a record of the people that came before us and are here today. There's been a lot that's been going on for 175 years. So we're working together. We're all different. We have different interests, different perspectives, but this is a community that's come together. Now, towns may wax and wane, come and go, but the county goes on, and it will go on in perpetuity here. So We're very grateful to the county for all the assistance that they give us. They've provided us monetary as well as other support. We want you to know we're not an agency of the county, even though that's in our name. This is a strictly private, nonprofit 501c3 organization, but we try to work very closely with all the local governments, all the other historic societies, and with the county itself. So again, welcome. I'd like to bring up right now our County Commissioner Stan Primozic. Did I get that right?
You're close.
Close, okay. Well,
I've been called a lot of things.
were they all your name?
People said it was. So.
In any event, Mary Starrett's not here. Rick Olson, the other county commissioner, is recovering from some illness that has afflicted him, but we're really glad to have Stan here to talk to us, and he's got a proclamation for us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Just want to thank all of you for being here. This is an auspicious occasion, if you will, and the 175th anniversary of a place that probably is the most beautiful place in the world to live. And we're here as a result of people who really struggled through a lot of things to provide for us a place to live. And we're here to celebrate that. And we couldn't do it at a better place. And I do appreciate the fact that the Historical Society would make available this wonderful facility for us to have this celebration. And I don't want to miss out on saying a big thank you to Carrie Martin. She's been almost totally responsible for pulling this together, not for the 175 years, but for this recent pulling together of this celebration of that event. 100 years ago, there were, or 175 years ago, there were about 100 people camped at Shampooey Park trying to decide whether they wanted a provincial government or not, a democratic form of government. And on a 52-50 vote, we got Yamhill County. One time, 12,000 square miles, if you will. So the county has decided to do a proclamation dedicating this day of celebration. So with your indulgence, I will go ahead and read that proclamation. And forgive me if I stumble a little because I didn't bring my reading glasses. Whereas the Oregon Provincial Legislature was established by a vote of 100 people near the Willamette River in 1843 as the first step in the creation of a formal representative government body to establish laws and execute the will of the people. And whereas the former Yamhill District, later county, was named for the Yamhilis Native American tribe and created on July 5th, 1843 by the Oregon Provincial Legislature. And whereas Yamhill County was established 5 years prior to the territory of Oregon in 1849 and was the first of 4 districts created by the Oregon Provincial Legislature. And whereas the original county stretched 12,000 square miles east-west from the Willamette River to the Pacific Ocean and north-south from the Columbia River to the California border. And whereas the immigrant wagon trains of 1843 and 1844 brought the bulk of the original settlers into Yamhill County, which now exceeds 100,000 persons. Now, therefore, the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners calls upon all residents of Yamhill County to celebrate its neighbors, agencies, organizations in support for Yamhill County on this day and to hereby proclaim July 5th, 2018, the 175th anniversary of Yamhill County, Oregon. Have fixed the day, and this was passed last Thursday, but we will sign it today, or on the 5th, I'm sorry. thank all of you for being here to celebrate this auspicious occasion with us. And with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for being here. I'll put my old hat back on. Pam, where did Pam go? Oh, there she is. You're up, Pam.
I'm wearing 2 hats today.
Oh, well, here.
No.
So am I.
As a board member for the Yamhill County Historical Society, and also as a community relations manager of First Federal, I thought whenever a crowd is gathered, it's always fun to give out money for good causes. And so First Federal's Community Rewards Program recently finished up for this year, and that's where we pay the nonprofits for where our customers donate their time and volunteer their time. So I'd like to present a check today to the Yamhill County Historical Society and the Yamhill Chapter DAR. So Eleanor, if you'd come up, we'll present to you both at the same time, but the volunteers just do such a great amount of things, and the program for First Federal runs as long as it takes our customers to turn in 10,000 hours of volunteer time. This year it was 8 weeks, and so that's amazing, especially compared to all the other volunteers in the community that donate their time to great projects. So Eleanor, here is a check for you, and here's a check for the Historical Society.
Looks like money to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Eleanor.
Okay, we're going to bring up now Dave Rucker. He's the Vice President of the Yamhill County Historical Society, and he's got the best hat in the whole county, I think. Mine won't look like that for another 175 years. Dave?
What I brought. Speaker is coming up in just a second. I'm going to give you a quick history bio on our speaker, Greg Leo. Greg is a third-generation Oregonian from Portland. He's a graduate of Lincoln High School. Greg also has a bachelor's in public administration from the University of Oregon and a master's of public administration from Harvard. Greg's an avid reader of history and advocate of heritage programs. He has served as president of Friends of Historic Shampooey and is the current vice president of Friends of Historic Butteville. He served as history chair of Portland's Arlington Club for 2 years, where he organized this word's in here a lot, sesquicentennial events. Going just a little bit further back in history, Greg served as student co-chair of the Lincoln High School Centennial Committee in 68 and 69. He's currently serving as the alumni co-chair of Lincoln High's Sesquicentennial Committee 50 years later. Over the past 18 years, Greg successfully advocated for 6 legislative acts which commemorate important events in Oregon history. 3 of these acts have resulted in statutory establishment of dates commemorating important people and events in Oregon. These dates are celebrated by schools and civic and community organizations around Oregon. Greg's passion for Oregon history is demonstrated in his current work on the Marion County 175th celebration, the Lincoln High School Sesquicentennial, and his Goldman speech celebrating the 80th anniversary of the Oregon State Capitol. He lives with his wife Rachel on a small farm near Shampooey and is the owner of the Leo Company, a public affairs and government relations firm which advises corporations, Native American tribes, and local governments on media relations and public affairs matters. I have a whole list of legislative acts here. The one that we'll highlight, because Greg will probably go over others, is Senate Bill 625 from 2009. That is establishing Ewing Young Day in Oregon. That's February 9th of each year, and I bet you'll tell us about Ewing Young Day. So, ladies and gentlemen, Greg Leo.
What an honor, and what a great museum. I had a chance to walk around the museum here today. This is a gem. This is, I can tell this community loves its history and celebrates it. And frankly, I saw, you know, hearses and, you know, tractors and ag gear out there that I have never seen in other places. So this is a absolutely unique place. You are right at a time in history when we have a great opportunity to celebrate the formation of American-style self-government on the West Coast. Because that's really what this 175th anniversary is about. The people who came west were really create the sense of who we are as Oregonians. They were the seekers. They were the people who were willing to push their fortunes to the horizon, to go west until they hit the Pacific Ocean. In our DNA as Oregonians, there is a certain cussed independence. And I think it's because we're the people who are self-reliant. We care about community. And frankly, many of us, you know, don't like a big government. So taking you back 175 years ago to the formation of the provisional government and the creation of Yamhill County, I want you to be thinking as the people who came across the prairies, you know, took the long journey on the Oregon Trail, maybe trapped throughout every river bottom in the American West and seeking the beaver, and ended up in the best land they saw. The best land they saw in the entire country of any place they went is right here in Yamhill County. And why was this land so good? Well, deep alluvial soils. You can grow anything here then and now. It had plenty of timber. You could build yourself a nice house. You had access to a waterway in order to, you know, go down to Yamhill, go down to Lafayette, go eventually have the locks built, be able to put your wheat on the boat and ship it down to Portland. And then from Portland, of course, it went everywhere. I mean, they shipped wheat all the way to China, to, you know, to Hawaii. And those boats that came back brought back those people that came here and settled in the Eden at the end of the Oregon Trail, at the land of milk and honey, and which we also know as Yamhill County. So what did these people expect when they met 175 years ago? So let me kind of give you a bit of a context, talk about the Champoeg meeting, talk specifically about Ewing Young, who is just an amazing figure, somebody who I really want you to know more about in the long term, and put a little context around this event and then open it up for questions. So be thinking of some questions, because we're all historians in this room here today. Let's see what questions we want to ask to kind of deepen our knowledge and understanding. You guys could probably teach me a few things too, is what I'm thinking. So what happened was there's about 2,000 non-Native Americans in the Oregon country in 1843. You know, the Hudson's Bay Company is losing its influence. The beaver market for beaver hats and, you know, London is now falling off. They're letting their trappers go. Many of these trappers were French Canadians. Many of these trappers were people the British of Canada, of Eastern Canada, wanted to get rid of and basically push west to become trappers for either the Hudson's Bay Company, or if they didn't get along with the British, for the American Fur Company. You've probably seen the movie Revenant, and that was the American Fur Company. It was a rough, tough group of people. And the people that ended up living here were the survivors. They were the ones that survived the harsh winters, all of the trials and travails of an untamed land, multiple you know, conflicts, and later friendships with Indians, and ended up being here as single men for a company that was losing interest in its market. So the Hudson's Bay Company did not want American settlers here. John McLaughlin was helpful to settlers, don't get me wrong, he is the father of Oregon, but the company policy was, hey, when you're done working for the company, go back to Quebec. You know, don't stay here. And so evidence of that is the Hudson's Bay Company would rent you a milk cow, but would not sell you a steer. Because if you could get meat, then you could sustain life here in the Willamette Valley. Otherwise, there's only so much deer and game, and of course you're competing with the Indians in order to get that. So having a strong agricultural base, including cattle and livestock, was super important to the settlement of this area. Along comes Ewing Young. We love Ewing Young for many reasons, but he was an irascible mountain man. He was kind of the leader. He was the one that put together the initial beaver expeditions, starting in Taos, New Mexico, coming west. As he was assembling one of his expeditions to the west, a young man stumbled into camp, didn't really know much about the way of the wild. Ewing Young took him in, he made him a cook, and that's how Kit Carson learned how to be a leader, a trapper, a person who eventually worked, on Indian relations, in some ways good, in some ways bad. So he was the guy that gave Kit Carson the idea that he can come west and work. So Ewing Young drove across the west, did a fantastic job organizing, the cattle, the different beaver drives, etc. Eventually, kind of got in the horse business, was collecting horses in California, collected a huge remuda of horses, which he was then driving north, and got into a conflict with the governor of California, the Spanish governor Figueroa. Well, this is kind of a geopolitical story in a way, because the Oregon country, we still have what's called the Oregon question, the question of who eventually is going to get this rich land on the Pacific coast. The Russians had a claim because they had trapping coming down as far south as Fort Ross, The Spanish, of course, had Spanish California before the, war, President Polk's war, which, got American control of California eventually. And, of course, the British had explored it, and through Captain Cook and, the various maritime visits here to Oregon, they had a pretty strong claim. So, however, did the Americans. We had Robert Gray come to the Columbia River, discover the river, and really was kind of the first guy there at the river. But it wasn't enough to settle the question that you had been there first. What settled the question was who was going to settle the Oregon country, who were going to be the people here in Oregon. So the Spanish governor Figueroa saw Ewing Young as a very bad omen. He was the guy who was the first, real American business entrepreneur, in this case horses, who was coming through California. And there were some conflicts. There were some trades that went bad. There was things that went bad. Basically, he thought Ewing Young was a horse thief. And he sent that message up to John McLaughlin to say, hey, this guy Ewing Young has been through California. It looks like he stole some of the horses. Be wary of Ewing Young. So John McLaughlin was not that, in favor of Ewing Young when he first showed up. He didn't really invite him in to Fort Vancouver. Didn't really grub stake him. A lot of times with settlers, they'd let him establish credit, get him tools and seeds and that kind of thing. Didn't do any of that. And Ewing Young, when I'm speaking of Ewing Young, in your mind's eye, think Tommy Lee Jones, okay? Think a young Clint Eastwood. This guy was young, he was tough, and even when he was older, he was extremely entrepreneurial. So the one thing about Ewing Young was, originally coming from the mountains of Tennessee, there is a culture of brewing whiskey, where in the mountains of Tennessee, they would take the barley and the malt, and they would make whiskey, and whiskey became an important trade item. Ewing Young set up a distillery here in Oregon, and basically when Ewing Young got to Oregon, I'm kind of jumping around here, but he went to the Chehalem Valley, which was, can you imagine what it was like in the Chehalem Valley in the late 1830s when there was nobody in Oregon? It was the greenest, most beautiful place on earth. And he stood at a place that's now Oakhurst, there just kind of northeast of Newburgh, and looked around him, and he saw this bowl-like valley that was totally green with the beautiful red hills on one side. And he stood in the middle of the valley and said, everything within my sight is now my land. And he made a 50-mile land claim. And you know what? There was nobody around to say, no, Ewing, you can't do that, So he established this beautiful ranch, and in the course of time, he had this still. And so both John McLaughlin and Jason Lee, who was at the Willamette Mission, he was with the Methodists at the Willamette Mission, did not think that Ewing Young still was such a good idea. It would not be good for Indian relations, they thought. So they convinced Lieutenant Slocum, who had a exploratory vessel, he's out here at the order of the president to kind of map the Pacific coast, to pick up Ewing Young and 22 of the local folks that worked with Ewing Young. They created this thing called the Willamette Cattle Company, and to take them by sea down to the Bay Area and drop them, and basically say, okay, you're now, in Spanish California, a place where Ewing Young was not popular, where they were kind of looking for any kind of mistake to put him in jail, because Ewing Young, was about America, in the area. And so Ewing Young and these 22 folks bought 420 curly-horned Spanish cattle and drove them from the Bay Area through the hostile rogue Indian country in southern Oregon, the Siskiyous, finally up to the Willamette Valley, up the Willamette Valley, and brought the cattle to the Chehalem Valley. And this changed everything. At this point now, they've got, lumber mills, they've got wheat that they're starting to grow, and if you look at the wheat statistics for this time, for the 1840s, there's a dramatic ramping up of the wheat industry. And I mean, the Willamette Valley at this time is so fertile that you throw down wheat seeds and you're going to have a full bushels of crop, not just for your own use, but for trade, which is really the core of Oregon agriculture at that time. So Ewing Young comes back up, and kind of unbelief by Jason Lee, who eventually leaves, and John McLaughlin, who says, I guess I better make peace with Ewing Young, in which case he did. So after Ewing Young brought the cattle up to what we know now as, the Chehalem Valley, then too, he built a trading post, had his sawmill, was really quite prosperous. And so Ewing Young was the richest man in Oregon at that point in time, and because of all the cattle. Now, he didn't own all the cattle, because some people, he was taking care of the cattle for like the lieutenant who sailed the ship, and he had invested. And so there were different shares of the Willamette Cattle Company, which, by the way, you as a citizen, and I just want to go off a little sidebar here for a minute, you as a citizen can go down today to the Oregon State Archives, which is in Salem there, and you can ask the archivist to let me see the original documentation on the Willamette Cattle Company. They will, after they check your ID, make sure you're a real Oregonian, look for moss on the north side, that kind of thing, they will bring out a cart with cardboard boxes, and in those boxes will be the original papers of the Willamette Cattle Company. So by telling you that story, I want to encourage you as historians to go out and do your own original research, because there's nobody that says you can't do this. And if you're careful with the documents, remember these are fragile documents, but you can actually go down to the state archives, pull out those cardboard boxes, and look at the original papers. It is a miraculous thing, and for the heart of a historian, it gives you great gladness, because once you actually see the paper and the real kind of details, these things become alive for you. This is what happened with me and Ewing Young, because I really like Ewing Young as a character I would know after studying him. So take the time to learn about those historical resources that are available through the state archives and through the Oregon Historical Society, because it is amazing. So now Ewing Young is up in Oregon, doing very well, richest man in Oregon. It's was it 1841. Winter of 1841, Ewing Young starts to really go downhill. Sidney Smith, who is kind of a young, new arrival doctor, and he and his wife Miranda Smith are living with Ewing Young over here by Oakhurst, just northeast of Newburgh. And Ewing Young dies. He has a great fever, kind of in and out of consciousness, eventually dies. Miranda and Sidney Smith bury him there at Oakhurst. Now here comes a little bit of the controversy. we historians know the story that Miranda Smith, the young woman, took the acorn and pressed it into the fresh dirt on Ewing Young's grave. And out of that acorn grew the mighty Willamette white oak that we see here in the picture. And if you go to Newburgh today and you look at any city vehicle, you will see a beautiful white oak on the decal on the city vehicle. That's the Ewing Young oak. The Ewing Young oak is a magnificent tree. Even if you were not interested in history, you would look at this tree and go, that is an incredible tree. So Ewing Young has died. All of his cattle are there, all of his trading posts, everything. And what are we going to do about it? So, you know, a lot of the early people who were there at the Champoeg meetings, and now I'm going to shift a little bit to Champoeg, were really preachers that Jason Lee had brought in. And many of these preachers at that time had some legal background. Luckily, Ira Babcock, who was one of the Methodist preachers, packed the laws of Iowa. Now, it's a little dispute whether it was Iowa or Indiana, but he at least had a very small amount of state laws tucked in his saddlebags when he came west. So there was some laws available that the ministers had. And the worry was that, let me get my water, that everybody was just going to wake up one day and go over to Ewing Young's place and grab something and go home. And that is not the kind of society that our early Oregonians wanted to live in. They wanted to have a society where there was a real probate process, where heirs got what was due, where claims to land were recognized, where somebody couldn't just come squat in your land and take it. And so there was this need for law. So there was also, because he had brought these 430 curly-horned Spanish cattle, a lot of predation at that time, and they were worried about wolves. And so, and you know, Commissioner, you and I will know this, because you only get people out of the public meeting when they're mad about something, you know? I know, you know, I sit on a fire board. We sit there and tumbleweeds blow through the witness area for most of our meetings. But every once in a while, there's a controversial issue, and the room fills up like this. So they were very smart politically. They said, let's pick an issue that every farmer and settler in the Willamette Valley is going to be upset about. And that issue is wolves. Wolves were killing livestock. It wasn't just wolves. They were concerned about panthers. And you may ask, well, we don't have panthers in the Willamette Valley. Yes, we do. We have cougars. They called the cougars panthers. They have problems with bears coming down and eating cattle, etc. So in organizing the wolf meetings, they basically said, what are we going to do about all of this predation on our livestock? And that was enough of a kind of hot-button issue to bring them out. And there were a series of meetings. Joseph Gervais had one at his house in what's now Jervis. And eventually the meetings happened at Champoeg. So why did they happen at Champoeg? And by the way, Champoeg is really, I say Champoeg, I always knew it as Champoeg. It's okay to call it Champoeg. The Indians call it in California Champoeg, which is more of a, you know, but I think if you say Champoeg or Champoeg, that you're doing okay. And Champoeg in California means good place, a place to gather good things to eat. And what they were talking about was the yampa root. So the yampa root is like this carrot-like root that grew in the sandy soil. So why were they at Champoeg? Well, because the Chehalem Creek washed down enough alluvial soil to make the beach sandy on the Champoeg side of the river, or what we would know as the Marion County side of the river. So if you took a bateau from the falls at Oregon City and you came down the river, the banks were so high and so brushy that you couldn't land your canoe. It was just impenetrable cottonwoods, blackberries, you name it. It was just hard to get there. But then they would get, you know, right across the river from the Champoeg, where Chehalem River came in, and that was called Camp du Sable. Camp du Sable is the camp of the sand. And so if you think about the geography here, and you're coming from the Tuolumne area, the Tualatin Valley, you would come over the mountains, the Chehalem Mountains, through the pass that we can drive the Hillsborough on today. And then you would come down into what's now the Chehalem Valley and, you know, Newburgh. So this was a perfect place. So it could collect commerce from the Tualatin Valley and also from all along the Willamette Valley. So the Hudson's Bay Company originally set up Champoeg as a warehouse. The folks that trapped not only just the Willamette Valley, but all the way down into Nevada. And just to give you an example, the Silvies Valley, which is just by Burns, they figured they took 250,000 beaver out of that valley. So you think about, before beaver trapping, beavers were everywhere, and basically they were thriving. And so the veterinary people tell us today that when they were trapping beavers, the beavers were 4 to 5 feet long.
Oh my God.
The beavers we see today, and one of them just got killed on my road over here by Champoeg, are about 2 feet long. And what happened over time is, because the beavers weren't there to maintain the beaver dams, that the actual ecology of the area changed, and they got a lot of willows that created a growth restriction on the beavers. So when we talk about beavers, you know, they're talking about big critters. They're not talking about the beavers that we see today. And so there was a lot of fur on those beavers. And if you ever see the round beaver pelts that they have up at Fort Vancouver, you know, today they have a couple of examples up there. They are impressive critters, and so you can see why it was so important. Well, anyway, back to the Hudson's Bay Company. So they had a warehouse there, and that's where they essentially launched the expeditions that went down the Willamette Valley and all the way down to Nevada. So going to Champoeg was a place that the settlers knew about. They would trade there. They could get china, they could get gunpowder, they could get paper, they could get the few necessities in exchange for wheat and you know, primarily beavers. So they were all used to doing that. So to get them out, they had the wolf meetings to talk about the wolves. But once they got them there, the real agenda came out. Okay, the real agenda was: are we going to organize government, and are we going to seek to become part of the United States? And what do we do about Indian relations? Here we are, few of us settlers and many of those Indians, and are we safe? And so it really creates a template for, if you had to invent government from scratch, what would you care about? What would be those things that motivate you? And in this case, it was about protections of persons and property, and establishing rights of due process so that people knew that they could go to a legal system that would treat them fairly. So it wasn't just the Hudson's Bay Company, you know, arbitrarily deciding something. And it wasn't that if you didn't do what the company said, they would send you back. So there we are at Champoeg, and we have the meeting, and they debated a bunch of different issues. But when it got right down to it, they called for the vote, and the vote was went down. Basically, there weren't enough votes. And so they had to kind of go back at it, and finally Joe Meek, you know, puts his boot in the dust and calls for the divide. Who's for a divide? This is May 2nd, 1843, and it's a split vote. So there are these two French Canadians that come over, and the two are Etienne Lucier, who was the first farmer in the Willamette Valley, and he was an older French Canadian trapper who had been in the valley since about the late 30s, late 1830s. He had taken in a young man named Francis Xavier Mathieu. A lot of people will say Matthew. If you say Matthew, it's okay. I say Mathieu, but I am not French. But when you hear Francis Xavier Mathieu, he is a very interesting person. He was actually a freedom fighter against the British in Quebec. There had been a rising of French Canadians in the late 1830s in Quebec, and Mathieu, as a young man, had participated and helped out that revolt. And so Mathieu went on the lam. He had to leave French Canada because of his political beliefs that Canada should be an American-style republic, that it should recognize individual rights, that it should not be British subjects. And so Mathieu made his way west, working for the American Fur Company, comes to the Willamette Valley, and you know, broke, penniless, you know, clothes on his back kind of thing. And luckily Etienne Lucier takes him in. In the course of that winter, and I'm pretty sure it was like the winter of 1838, there was a lot of talk that went on amongst the French Canadians. You know, the British really don't recognize our rights. They don't give us what we would expect for free speech. The company discriminates against us. We don't get the economic rights, and we have no recourse. So when the Hudson's Bay Company is tough on its employees, who do you go to? They're the only authority out here. So at the Champoeg meeting, it's very important that these two French Canadians came over, making it from an even split vote to a 52-48 vote. And if you go to Champoeg today and you look at the obelisk, you know, the monument, and it's got the names of all the people who voted for. I had heard that the people who voted against were lost to history, you know, because as historians we know that the victors always write history, right? And then I learned that Mathieu had actually written down all the names in the ledger of the store at the historic Butteville store that he operated after the meeting. So Mathieu was enough of a person who cared about the rights of others that he actually recorded the names of the people who were on the wrong side of the vote. Hey, where else in America do you have an excellent stream tractor come by? Really, fantastic. So I think Mathieu is as much of a hero as Ewing Young, but can you see the trend here? Who these people were? They were cussedly independent. They loved their freedom. They did not want somebody else to tell them what to do. In the July 5th meeting that we celebrate today that established the 4 counties, the big issue that they locked up over was about should there be a governor of Oregon. They didn't think so. They didn't think that any one person should have any say over any of the rest of us. And so they deferred. They didn't have a governor of Oregon at first. What they had was a legislature. They had a 9-person legislature who got together on the day we celebrate, you know, the 5th of July, 1843, in order to make a public body that was deliberative, that was democratic, that was made up of your friends and neighbors, that would help write the laws that all of us would live under. That is the Oregon way. That established the way that we today as Oregonians, when we're having our best days in public life, it's about collaboration. It's about different points of view, sitting down at the table and working out, you know, good solutions where nobody gets left out. And so this is why we're Oregonians, and we are different, and we should be proud of those things. So as I kind of wrap up and we get towards questions here, I did want to call on a couple of things. First of all, up here I've got the map that shows the way the counties developed. So on July 5th, they established the 4 counties, Champoeg, Yamhill, of course, Tualatin, and Clackamas. And then you can see after that, the counties developed. Early state law said that you should be able to ride in 1 day's time on your horse from any place in the county to the county seat. And so that's how we started to think about, well, okay, if I'm here in McMinnville, am I going to be able to ride my horse to Newburgh? How long is that going to take to get the court or the vote or the, you know, register a claim or do whatever we do? So then you see kind of the bifurcation of the states to the 36, counties, the 36 counties that we have today. One of my messages here to you today is that is not set in concrete. Look at the dozen times that it has changed. There's no reason why we couldn't decide today to make other Oregon counties. I think there's a pretty good argument for maybe some of the Eastern Oregon counties might not have enough resources to run. Also, you think about Multnomah County, you know, not shocking, but hey, most of the landmass of Multnomah County is in national forest, not in urban area. So things to think about as Oregonians. Just because it's the way it's been since 1936 doesn't mean that's the way it always can be, because we the people can change things like that. So the other thing is I wanted to point out the bill, and I want to especially thank Senator Larry George and now Senator Kim Thatcher, because they were the folks that I worked with to get the Ewing Young bill done. But every February 9th in Oregon is Ewing Young Day. That is statutory. When we were doing the bill, we said, no, we don't want to have a memorial or where you do just one day that you celebrate. We want to make sure that every year that we celebrate Ewing Young. And why do we celebrate Ewing Young? Okay, he is the spirit of enterprise. He is the guy that came out and built the sawmill, you know, the guy that got the cattle. He was, this spirit of enterprise is what drives our economy and our lives forward. So my challenge to you today is people of Yamhill County, let's celebrate Ewing Young every February 9th. Now, now I go every year to the Ewing Young Elementary School, and they are great kids. They're the pioneers. They do a great skit. But let's do something bigger. Let's do something where the whole county understands that this is Ewing Young Day. It's an important day in Oregon history, and it's a great way to bring back public focus. So, with the help of our senators and with the, forbearance of the rules committees in both the House and the Senate, we were able to pass this bill. It's our opportunity, so I say to you citizens, let's use it. Okay, thank you. That's what I had prepared today. Let's take some questions. Who's got a good historical question here? Please.
Can you tell us where the Ewing Young oak tree is?
Yes. Okay. It's at Oakhurst, which is a really nice horse breeding facility that Jack and Cookie Root own. In fact, they have Grinder there, who was the Kentucky Derby winner, I think about 12 years ago. And so, help me with the roads, Commissioner. You probably know this better than I do. But out of Newburgh, if you go from Newburgh northwest on, what's the name of that road? 240. Yeah, Highway 240, towards Yamhill, out of Newburgh. So it's about, I'm going to say 6 miles out of Newburgh on 240. And it's open to the public, just, right-hand side of the road. Great. And I forgot to mention the DAR, because, yes, there you can see the sign, but look for the Oakhurst sign. Now, the marker is its own excellent story, and in the front row, I've got the DAR. And let's give these ladies a big hand, because they are so cool. Yeah. So the marker, the historical marker, is lost, and nobody can find it. And then eventually it shows back up. So the Champaign chapter of the DAR took it on as their year-long project to reset the marker. So the marker at the tree has been reestablished by the DAR. And in the course of that, we had to convince, the DAR chapter had to convince, and I helped you some, but it was really you that did it, went to the National DAR to revisit the history. So there was some controversy that I mentioned about, gee, the tree is too old to have been the place where Miranda Smith stuck the acorn, So it's kind of an argument between archaeologists and historians. As historians, I think we love the story so much because it is such a story of hope and generational passage. I think we need to settle with the historians, and that's what the National DAR did when they checked the history behind this official DAR site, and it is a beautiful site. So what are the plans for Oakhurst and the tree? The Roots have been thinking about making whiskey. Do you see a theme here? And this would be Ewing Young whiskey. So they've registered the name Ewing Young whiskey, and just like the folks in Pendleton do with the Roundup, or with the Pendleton Roundup, they have registered Ewing Young whiskey, and at some point there may be some rye whiskey you can buy at the OLCC that will, some of that money will go towards creating a more well-funded historical site celebrating Ewing Young. So the hope is that with each bottle of Ewing Young whiskey, some of the money will go into supporting Oakhurst and making it available to the public. Other questions? Well, did that answer? Yeah, great. Please.
I'm not sure if this is a question. I'm really rather new to this whole area, and so this is all very interesting to me from the start. But I noticed that you don't have homestead exemptions, for instance, on your property tax. Was that something that came out of, I don't want government messing with my stuff back then? I mean, I don't know how any of that worked with the settlers. With the settlers,
first of all, most of the good land was taken already by 1843. So the French Canadians moved in to the best bottom land. If you go kind of up around St. Paul and you look at the plats are long and narrow. So the French had this idea that you want to put one end of your property on the water, and then one end of your property needs to be in the forest, and then the rest of it needs to be plains. So you see these really kind of long, skinny plats up there. So in order to settle these claims, the French came, they settled the land, and they're on the land, and they drew their own lines, but there was no government to give them title. So entitlement of these properties was a super big issue because, you know, you want your land to be your land and not just land that you're going to be moved off of later. So the government did, in fact, establish those original donation land claims. Now, the issue that you're talking about is about overlays, and I don't need to tell anybody in this room that Oregon land use planning is controversial. Anytime you put an overlay of any kind over somebody's land that might in some way diminish that property right, people are going to be concerned about it. So to that question, I guess there are, Commissioner, you can help me with this, but I guess there are historical overlays, but I'm not here to advocate for them. I think people should own their own land, and they should be good enough historians where if there is a historical site in their land, for goodness sake, don't plow it under, you know? And the original Ewing Young cabin was plowed under. I mean, they farmed over it, and, you know, the building was there, and they just kind of ran over it, and then they ran the disc over it, and pretty soon, if there are any artifacts, they're going to be 4 or 5 feet down in this really beautiful, rich Willamette Valley soil we have. So they didn't get much out of, and they did do a dig there. They did an archaeological dig there. We are having extremely good luck with our archaeological digs at Champoeg Park because, you know, after Champoeg was washed out in the the December 1863 flood, you know, normally you have these cabins and then you have a debris field out the back where when the china broke, they chucked it out the back door. And so you can kind of tell where they were, and all of the stuff they dig out of there, the bottles, you know, we found the derringer, you know, the square nails, all the things that you find at these sites are there because that part of the park wasn't farmed actively. So as you run the discs and the rakes over it, eventually it migrates everything deep in the soil where you can't find it. But I hope that answered.
It kind of does.
Yeah.
I think I want to dig into it a little bit more.
Yeah, good. And, you know, there's a lot of good work being done by Oregon State University and Dr. Bronner on the archaeology of the early Willamette Valley. And he is a remarkable speaker, and I urge you to have him here someday because he really has a lot of great stories about how they're unearthing literally the artifacts that are telling the story of early Oregon. Questions? Please.
Thank you for being here today, first of all.
My honor.
I think you mentioned at the time, in the 1840s, there were about 2,000 natives in this area?
2,000 settlers.
Oh, settlers.
Yeah, there were probably 50, 100,000 natives.
That's what I was curious about.
This is before the smallpox, you know.
Okay. So the smallpox epidemic wiped them out in what years?
Oh, they died rapidly from the time of middle to late 1840s.
Yeah.
I mean, by statehood, most of the Indians were dead from disease.
Yeah. So the relationship with the natives and the whites at that time, how would you describe that?
It was a great topic. The French Canadians married, they came out here as single men and they wanted to settle down. They had nobody to marry. There were very few non-Native American women here. And so many of the French Canadians married Kalapuyan women and women from other places. So Joe Meek and Robert Newell, two of the central people to Champoeg, they've married Nez Perce princesses. And Kitty Newell, Robert Newell's wife, who is Nez Perce, is buried at Champoeg Park. I had the honor of taking the chief of the Nez Perce tribe, came over from Lapwai, Idaho, to see the gravesite, and he was very pleased with the way that we had treated his ancestor. So, men need women, and let's face it, women do all the work in life, right? There's controversy there, but for the most part, yes. And it's hard to settle without, a partner who's really managing everything that needs to be done. And until the migration started in 1843 and came through, 1849, there were not a lot of white women here in Oregon. So they intermarried, and if you go to Grand Ronde today, you see a lot of French names. And so we had the Grand Ronde Honor Guard over, and I'm seeing all the place names of signs, There's like Mercier, Biceri, all these different names that you see on street signs in French Prairie. And the reason why is because they are descendants, many of them are Grand Ronde tribal members today. So Indian relations were hard. and not good. You know, Ewing Young fought the rogues. In fact, two of the guys on the monument actually started the Rogue War by shooting rogue warriors as they were traveling through the Rogue River Valley, you know, and the area where the Rogue Indians were. So they were worried, and so when Narcissa and Marcus Whitman were killed, somebody help me with the Whitman massacre. I think it was 1845, sounds about right. The 1st Oregon Militia, the very first manifestation of the Oregon National Guard, was mobilized at Champoeg, led by Joe Meek and Colonel Gilliam, and they drove up to Walla Walla, where the Whitman massacre had occurred, mainly because Joe Meek's daughter was at the mission. You know, he was worried about his daughter, but many of the settlers had left their kids at the Whitman mission because they didn't know what to expect when they got to the Willamette Valley. They wanted to get there, get the house, get the cabin built, get settled, so then bring the kids back. So it was a real shock to everybody when the Cayuse killed Narcissa and Marcus Whitman, and we formed up the 1st Volunteer, Oregon Infantry, and they then rode up the Walla Walla, captured the Cayuse, brought them back to Oregon City, had a very quick trial, and hung them. And that was kind of the way many of the settlers looked at Indian relations. Like, yeah, we'll get along, go along, as long as you don't mess with us, but the minute you mess with us, then you will feel the terrible swift sword. So I would say Indian relations were generally not good. I think if you ask the Indians, so, you know, one of my consulting jobs I have in my work life is to work with the Warm Springs Indians, who they actually cooperated with the American government, mainly because after they wrote the Treaty of 1844, the Snake Indians, 1844, is that right? 1845. It was the Joel Palmer Treaty. Anyway, so the Snake Indians came over to annihilate the Warm Springs Indians, and the River Indians, who had actually worked out a treaty with the American government. So the famous story that the American lieutenant at Fort Dalles took a wagon load of rifles down and armed the Warm Springs in order that they could fight off the Snakes and the other Indians who were really mad that they had entered into the treaty. At that time, the Warm Springs built a bond with the United States government that goes on today, and eventually, during the Modoc Indian War in the 1880s, after General Canby was killed, you know, by Captain Jack at the conference table. Wow, that's not a good thing. That the cavalry was really just not getting to the Modocs because they went down to the lava lands, and the Warm Springs Indians actually put together the Warm Springs Scouts that went in, ferreted out the Modocs, and helped the cavalry capture them and take them to Fort Klamath and hang them. So, you know, Indian relations in Oregon is not as rosy as some of us might think. By the way, there's a great book on the Oregon Indian Wars, and I can't remember the author right hand, but we had him as a speaker at Champoeg one time, and it was pretty shocking, some of it. So, questions? Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity. Celebrate, you know, this is 175th American-style self-government. You are the people. Thank you. And I have a copy of the only Ewing Young book around these days, so this needs to be reprinted by somebody. So.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Very good. Open up anything for me?
On the 9th of February, the commission might do something, celebrate it. There's something like it's got to be bigger than just one elementary school. You know, to celebrate. So let's work on that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Hey, how you doing?
I'll get out of your way.
So is that book in the library?
You know, you take a look at it. I bought it at the Air Force Store, but it was retired from the Dallas Library. I would love to get that.
They got rid of it.
Oh, yes.
Those papers, I love those papers.
Well, I'm glad that it's done the hill. And I'll
This looks like the mail there.
Yes. No.
Well, that's very interesting, don't you think? I hope you enjoyed it. You can watch it later. This whole video will be up on our Facebook page and our website, KLYC Radio on Facebook and KLYC.us. Fast forward into any part of it that you want. And we're going to be doing more of this with KLYC, as we are, of course, a radio station, but we're becoming what's called multi-platform, which is we do podcasts, we do video web streaming. We have an audio channel up for each of the 10 communities in Yamhill County. We have Oregon Grapevine Radio, where you can hear a radio report each Saturday morning at 10 a.m. With Ken Inlow talking about wine. And hopefully as soon as next week, we'll have a show talking about food in Oregon, and especially the Willamette Valley. And Divine Dining, the Divine Dining Depot, I think is what we're going to be calling it. Oregon Grapevine Radio, you can find it by going to OregonFineWine.com or OregonGrapevineRadio.com and listen to the podcasts and find out about wine in Oregon. Also interested in your comments about our expanded coverage of events.